and there was a total shutdown of all thoughts. Everything came to a stop. It all just stopped. And suddenly everything started swirling and coming into me. It is just like a vortex. I mean, at first the world, it started splitting up into teeny tiny little pixels, sort of like little square-shaped ones. So the whole picture started splitting apart in front of me before my eyes, and it all started bouncing like this and entering me. And suddenly everything shut off. Nothing was left. There was no sense of self. It is just as if you fall into complete darkness, and yet you cannot really say that you are there because you were not there at all whatsoever. And then suddenly everything reappears and it all started coming out of me again. And the image formed right before me, appearing, taking shape. But at the very moment that everything appeared, I wasn't in that picture. I was not present in this picture. I saw exactly how everything was happening. The body was in this picture. Everything was in the picture, but I wasn't inside the picture. And this consciousness, it wasn't connected. The body is irrelevant. Everything appeared as projections. Everything appeared as a projection, like an illusion. I watched as the body arrived and passed right through, but I myself did not move at all. I was merely the observer. Everything moved inside this picture. The body moved somewhere, but I didn't move at that moment. I was just watching all of it. It could be that sort of story of this character who later vanished in the search. In childhood, back when I was still little, there was no split between the world and me. And everything was so incredibly familiar. And I vividly remember that great close connection with all of the animals, with all of the insects. There was no separation with people. I remember at one point having this memory that everything here is for me. I didn't know how to explain it. My mom used to tell these stories about me, how I would always drag home every single animal that I happened to see or encounter, but maybe they were the ones finding me. Kittens, puppies, yet I feared dogs. I wanted to take them all into my heart, so they'd find their home, so they would all be surrounded by love. But at one point there was such a turning point, a shift. You could say even a rupture. When I was 5, my grandfather hanged himself. And from that moment on, my whole world just started falling apart. Things started getting really psychedelic. I even started having these dreams about my dear loved ones who are simply no longer here with us. My grandfather used to come to me and he would put it around my neck, tying a knot on my neck and telling me that I really had to go with him, that we are inseparable from one another. At some point I'd realize it was a dream and I could step out of that dream. So it's been like that since childhood, realizing a dream within a dream. I mean, I knew that if I squeezed my eyes shut tight right now, the dream would end. But the dream didn't end. During my teenage years, I also started seeing it. And I began to feel this fear, an immense fear, that something about it just wasn't right. And no matter what questions I asked anyone, I couldn't find an answer. I just couldn't get an answer. Everyone just kept telling me that there's something wrong with you, that something's just not right with you. I started losing my connection with myself. I started feeling so incredibly lonely. And this anxiety and fear, they stayed with me constantly. Even with people, I felt so lonely too. I would run away and just hide in that loneliness. I stopped listening to my inner self. And then these turning points started to happen. Our father, he was like, you could say, a family tyrant. I never allowed myself to be a child. I also had a younger brother, and I was always trying to earn that love because they didn't accept me for who I am. I didn't understand why I wasn't loved for who I was, why I was so different, why nobody could understand me. I sometimes had to take on the role of a mother, because Mom also started to close herself off because she didn't feel support or strength from Father, didn't feel any love from him. And at a certain point, I started noticing that I cannot be weak. I always have to be strong, because I have to support my mother. I always have to be the best for my father. I have to be the pillar of support for my brother. I never once thought about myself. I kept forgetting about myself. It was such a sacrificial love, as I was always serving my family. These dreams never really stopped. All the people who had left our lives, they would come back in those dreams. There were times when, probably at an age where I was no longer 11 years old, I even ran away from home. I'd hide somewhere because I could not understand exactly what was happening to me. I felt like I was dying. It was such intense suffering and confusion and rejection and resistance all at once to everything that was happening. And it felt to me at that moment that I was the only one suffering so much. It was the greatest illusion and such a powerful detachment of self from self. Because during that very period, everyone was suffering. Then things started happening where I would just black out, and in the moments when I blacked out, I didn't even know who I was. I'd come back, but from what I'm told or whatever happened, I didn't remember what I'd said or what I'd done. And once again, I thought that something was wrong with me. Then there were these periods when my mind started talking very loudly and spoke with all the voices of all the people I'd heard throughout the day. It could say it so loudly. And I started to withdraw into myself. There was this period, I think, when I was already in college. There was an attempt, you could say, to end my life because I'd reached my limit. I thought that if I didn't end my life, I would probably just die quite soon. I'm just dying. And at that very moment, my parents felt they had no other way out but to send me to a psychiatric hospital for an evaluation. And it was another truly brutal experience. Once again, I found no understanding in them. And there I saw just how this restless mind of mine, I stayed there for a month, and by then, Dad came to visit me. He saw the state I was in, and he took me out of there. In the end, they didn't find anything there. And after that, I started closing myself off even more, because after I had opened up and talked about what was happening to me, everyone told me that I was just not right. The next turning moment was back then. Yeah, and I went through a betrayal by my husband, who was also my closest person. It was such a double blow, like a real stab right in the back, one might even say. And yet, for some strange reason, I was actually always thinking of other people. I just thought, well, if this has just happened, then it was simply meant to happen. So it's some kind of work for me. It means there's something I missed within myself. And for some reason, the main idea for me was that this means that everyone is simply short on love, and those people who betrayed me, they also lacked love. And it so happened that I went to Moscow and ended up in the Moscow School of Parapsychology. Finished my studies, got my parapsychology degree to work with people. For some period, apparently it was needed. I worked with people and helped people, but at the moment when I was helping people, I saw that all these problems, they were mirrored in me. Each and every one of these problems revealed a problem inside of me. Then I saw in myself that many personalities are fighting within me, and that I'm being controlled by this very childish, infantile kid. It was also some kind of program. And at that moment, it just so happened that I joined the sim group. It's working with thoughts using Byron Katie's approach, the Byron Katie method. I worked with them for a long time, specifically identifying thoughts. And I saw it and looked at it from every side. And no matter where I looked, I always came right back to where it all first began. It is childhood, it is the child. And everywhere there was the child. The reason for it was that the child who projecting everything onto everyone else. Many ideas fell through back then. I saw within myself that I could not be humble towards my husband because I was always fighting against him. That strong personality that never wanted to be weak. I really didn't let my man be a man at all. And then this thought occurred, it just kind of happened on its own. I decided to go to a men's monastery to learn humility. I spent a great deal of time in that men's monastery too. I would shut myself away in a solitary cell there and spend time with myself, all alone with myself. And many times it was exactly a dark night of the soul. And then at one point, a priest came up to me. I went to confession with them many times. And the priest himself, who had heard my confession himself, he turned to me and said that he said he doesn't see any fear in my eyes. And then he said that in their very own monastery, they are not able to confess to one another at all. He is in so much pain, and he decided to ask me if he could confess to me. It was such a truly massive experience. It was yet another major turning point. I agreed to do so. And that was exactly what the whole experience of a truly non-judgmental acceptance of the event was like. When I was in the cell alone, I suddenly saw before me, you could say, a demon. And he was so vivid. But at the same time, I wasn't afraid of him. It was just like I'm seeing a person for real. That's how I saw him. But I wasn't scared. And then in the evening, when I went downstairs, after coming down from the priest's quarters to listen to the evening prayer service, one of the monks approached me and told me that there would be a religious procession held later on today. I asked exactly why, for what reason. He said that a stray devil is roaming around here. We want to drive him out of here. And he turns to me and says, well, why am I even telling you this? You saw him yourself. There were things happening there that are impossible to explain. There was no reason for it. It just was. And in that very moment when I saw him, it really felt like that was me at that very moment. And it is just so clearly visible. What was inside of me just kind of came out of me. Then, and every time all this changed, such a massive transformation of consciousness took place. It all shifted into dreams, because in the dream, at first I'd always get tense at the character, and at first the character got tense, woke up, and every time in that dream, I realized that it was a dream and started saying, don't you see that this is a dream? And then I also saw that in the dream, I was explaining it all to myself. I was everywhere. And in the dream, when I realized that it was indeed a dream, I became the architect of my own dream. I'd immediately start to fly. And if I saw any boundaries in front of me, I'd just open them up. There was a window and I would open it up. If I saw a wall, I had no fear at all. I realized that it was just a project and I would walk right through that wall. There were no boundaries, absolutely no boundaries at all. There was no fear of death whatsoever. Every time I'd show myself, look, you're not dying, and I would fall into the abyss. Any abyss, any endless pit I saw, I would fall right in. Actually, for me, that final breaking point was when my mother passed away. And that was truly the very strongest attachment of all. And at that moment, when she had already passed, I spent those 40 days in her house and lived through all that pain. And there was no longer a split between the pain and me. The pain was simply the pain of a dream. I began to see myself in everyone. So when I was telling someone something, I suddenly started to see that I was everywhere. The dreams were so clear and vivid, like someone is talking to me, suddenly the lights go out, then the lights come back on. And suddenly I see the person is wearing a mask. I start to move closer, and this mask was woven from such thin, thin threads. I moved closer, looked behind the mask. It was me, everywhere. I was in everyone. And everything I was explaining to someone, trying to explain, it was me. And in this dream, I started to laugh, laughing louder and louder. Then I started having dreams again, tied to my own life, meaning my children were dying. Then my husband would die and my loved ones. And I'd live through that pain again. But at some point in that dream, I started turning back to myself. I suddenly started seeing as if I were right inside the screen, and I am watching everything from just behind the screen. And once again, I was laughing out loud. It was nothing but an illusion. It was only a dream. About most likely 2 months later, I took a flight over to Moscow, and that is exactly when Samadhi happened. This experience probably happened on its own because I was flying, I was completely detached. And there was a total shutdown of all thoughts. Everything came to a stop, it all just stopped. And suddenly everything started swirling and coming into me. It is just like a vortex. I mean, at first the world, it started splitting up into teeny tiny little pixels, sort of like little square-shaped ones. So the whole picture started splitting apart in front of me before my eyes. And it all started bouncing like this and entering me. And suddenly everything shut off. Nothing was left. There was no sense of self. It is just as if you fall into complete darkness, and yet you cannot really say that you are there because you were not there at all whatsoever. And then suddenly everything reappears and it all started coming out of me again. And the image formed right before me, appearing, taking shape. But at the very moment that everything appeared, I wasn't in that picture. I was not present in this picture. I saw exactly how everything was happening. The body was in this picture. Everything was in the picture, but I wasn't inside the picture. And this consciousness, it wasn't connected. The body is irrelevant. Everything appeared as projections. Everything appeared as a projection, like an illusion. I watched as the body arrived and passed right through, but I myself did not move at all. I was merely the observer. Everything moved inside this picture. The body moved somewhere, but I didn't move at that moment. I was just watching all of it. It went on for some time, probably for about a day, a very long time, because that day was so intense. Every emotion exploded. It was living through itself. Every emotion was an explosion. Even just if the body drank water, it was like it was doing it all for the first time. It felt as if I was experiencing that taste for the very first time. And if I was looking at something, it felt like I was already right there in the very place where I was looking. So it was a sudden shift. Consciousness was not anchored to the body whatsoever. I didn't even understand where everything was being seen from. And words weren't needed at all. Words just lost all meaning. Everything was clear without words. Like before words, everything was plain and clear. And it was clearly visible that no one was inside the body. Everything did itself, happened on its own. But there was no one there, absolutely no one. There was only this happening, just what was happening.